Rain lashed against the tinted windows of the black SUV as it drove through the dark streets of Chicago. It was shortly after 11 p.m. on a Thursday evening in November, and the city seemed to suffer under the weight of cold and humidity. Street lamps cast orange pools of light on the wet asphalt, and the few pedestrians still out hurried toward their destinations with collars raised and heads bowed. In the back seat of the vehicle sat Marcus Donnelly, 48 years old, with a face marked by too many sleepless nights and difficult decisions. His grey eyes stared through the rain-streaked window, but didn't really see the passing cityscape. His thoughts were elsewhere, lost in memories and fears he would have preferred to avoid. The tailored charcoal suit fit perfectly, but his shoulders seemed tense, as if he carried a burden no one could see. "Boss, we're almost there," said Tommy, his driver and longtime confidant, from the driver's seat. His voice broke through the heavy silence in the vehicle. Tommy was in his early 50s, a man of few words but absolute loyalty. He had known Marcus for nearly 30 years, had seen him rise from a simple street kid to one of the most influential men in the city. Marcus only nodded silently. His jaw was tense, and his hands, which normally rested calmly on his knees, clenched into fists. It wasn't the cold that made him shiver, but the message he had received 3 hours ago, a message he never expected to receive, a message that shook his carefully controlled world. The SUV turned into the driveway of an imposing estate in one of Chicago's most exclusive neighborhoods. The 3-story red brick mansion stood majestically behind wrought iron gates and was surrounded by a perfectly maintained garden that, even in November, still radiated a certain elegance. Security cameras monitored every corner of the property, and discreetly positioned guards patrolled at regular intervals. This was Marcus's fortress, his refuge, the only place where he could feel relatively safe. When the vehicle stopped in front of the main entrance, Tommy quickly opened the door for Marcus. The cold November wind hit his face, bringing with it the smell of rain and rotting leaves. Marcus got out, adjusted his tie, and took a deep breath. The heavy oak door of the house opened, and in the warm light of the entrance hall stood Victor, his security chief. "Mr. Donnelly," Victor said with a nod. He was a man in his 40s, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had seen too many fights. Your wife is waiting for you in the living room." Marcus stopped abruptly. "My wife," he repeated, and in his voice was a mixture of tension and something that sounded like suppressed anger. "You mean Elena?" "Yes, sir, Mrs. and Donnelly, the current Mrs. Donnelly," Victor confirmed, not avoiding Marcus's penetrating gaze. Marcus nodded slowly and entered the house. Warmth immediately enveloped him, a stark contrast to the cold outside. The entrance area was generously designed, with marble floors reflecting the light of crystal chandeliers and walls decorated with expensive artwork. Everything in this house screamed power, wealth, and control. Yet at this moment, Marcus felt that control slipping through his fingers. He walked through the long corridor to the living room, his steps on the marble echoing in the silence. With each step, the tension in his chest grew. What did she want? Why now? These questions circled in his head as he reached the double doors to the living room and pushed them open. Elena Donnelly sat on one of the cream-colored leather sofas, a glass of red wine in her hand. She was 34 years old, a breathtakingly beautiful woman with long, dark hair falling in perfect waves over her shoulders. She wore an elegant black dress that accentuated her slender figure, and her green eyes sparkled in the glow of the fireplace. However, in those eyes today there was no warmth, but something hard, determined. "Marcus," she said in a calm voice, and placed the wine glass on the glass coffee table. "Thank you for coming." "Right. What do you want, Elena?" Marcus asked without preamble, and remained standing in the doorway. His voice was controlled, but the tension was clearly audible. Elena stood up slowly, smoothed her dress, and walked to the fireplace. The flames cast dancing shadows on her face, and for a moment Marcus saw the woman he had fallen in love with 6 years ago. The woman who had fascinated him with her intelligence, her beauty, and her apparent fearlessness. The woman he had married, Not out of love, as he had to admit, but out of calculation and desire. "I want to talk to you," Elena said, and turned to him. "About us. About our situation." Marcus snorted contemptuously and finally entered the room. He poured himself a whiskey at the bar, dropped an ice cube into the glass, and took a long sip. The alcohol burned in his throat, but he welcomed that feeling. It distracted him from the other, much more dangerous emotion that was boiling up inside him. "Our situation," he repeated, turning to her. "I think our situation is quite clear, Elena. We're married. You live here in luxury. You have everything your heart desires. What's there to discuss?" Elena laughed bitterly, a laugh without joy. "Everything my heart desires? Marcus, you have no idea what my heart desires, and that's exactly the problem." Then, at that moment, the door opened again, and Victor entered. His face was tense, and Marcus immediately saw that something was wrong. "Sir, sorry for the interruption, but there's a situation," Victor said quietly but urgently. "What kind of situation?" Marcus growled, and set his glass down with a hard click on the bar. Victor hesitated, cast a quick glance at Elena, then back at Marcus. "It's about Isabel, sir. Your ex-wife. She's here." The words hit Marcus like a blow. The world seemed to stand still for a moment. Isabel. His pulse quickened, and he felt his stomach tighten. He hadn't heard that name in over a year, had done everything to banish her from his life and his thoughts. And now she was here, at his door, on this night, at the exact moment when Elena wanted to talk to him. "What?" Marcus managed to say, his voice suddenly hoarse. "What do you mean she's here?" "She's at the main gate, sir," Victor explained. "She says she urgently needs to speak with you. She says it's a matter of life and death." Marcus stared at Victor in disbelief. Isabel, his first wife, the woman he had married 8 years ago when he was still young and stupid enough to believe that love and his business could be compatible. The woman he had hurt, betrayed, finally abandoned when she asked too many questions and knew too much. The woman he had paid off with a generous divorce settlement, on the condition that she disappeared from his life and never came back. And now she was here. Elena watched Marcus with an impenetrable expression. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing. She simply picked up her wineglass again and took a sip, as if this revelation were the most normal thing in the world. "Let her in," Marcus finally said with a firm voice. "Marcus, are you sure?" Victor asked doubtfully. "We don't know what she wants. It could—" "I said let her in," Marcus interrupted him sharply. "Bring her to the study. I'll be right there." Victor nodded and quickly left the room. The door closed behind him, and Marcus and Elena stood facing each other in tense silence. The crackling of the fireplace fire was the only sound in the room. "Interesting," Elena finally said and put down her glass. "Your ex-wife shows up, exactly at the moment when I want to talk to you about our marriage. What a coincidence." Marcus ignored the sarcasm in her voice. His mind was working feverishly. What did Isabel want? Why now, after all this time? Did she have problems? Did she need money? Or was it something else, something more dangerous? "Elena, we have to postpone this conversation," Marcus said, and reached for his jacket. "I have to—" "No." Elena interrupted him decisively and took a step toward him. "We're not postponing anything, Marcus. I've waited long enough. You will talk to me now." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her for the first time that evening. He saw the determination in her eyes, the tension in her posture, the way her hands were clenched into fists. Elena wasn't a woman who could be ignored. She was intelligent, strong-willed, and, as he knew from experience, incredibly dangerous when she felt cornered. "What do you want me to tell you, Elena?" Marcus asked tiredly and rubbed his temples. The headache that had been threatening for hours was now making itself known. "I want the truth," Elena said quietly, but with emphasis. "I want to know why you married me. I want to know if there was ever even a spark of real feelings in you. And I want to know—" She stopped, took a deep breath. "I want to know if you still love her." The question hung heavily in the room. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. Did he still love Isabel? The question he had never really dared to ask himself, the question whose answer could change everything. Before he could answer, the door opened again. Victor stood there, and behind him, like a ghost from the past, stood Isabel. She had changed. Her once long, honey-blonde hair was now shorter, just long enough to touch her shoulders. She had become thinner, almost too thin, and her face looked tired, with dark shadows under her eyes. She wore a simple grey coat, soaked by the rain, and her hands trembled slightly as she reached into her pocket. Her eyes, those blue eyes that Marcus had once loved so much, met his, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. In those eyes was fear, desperation, but also something else. Hope, or was it resignation? "Marcus," Isabel whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry to come like this, but I had no other choice. They're after me, and they won't stop until they find me." The tension in the room was palpable, like an invisible force making the air vibrate. Marcus stood frozen, his gaze fixed on the woman he had banished from his life more than a year ago. Isabel looked like a wounded bird, seeking shelter from a storm, and despite everything that had happened between them, Marcus felt a flicker of something he thought he had long buried: concern. Elena watched the scene with a mixture of fascination and barely concealed anger. Her fingers gripped the wineglass so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She had heard a lot about Isabel, from hints, from accidentally overheard conversations, from things Marcus had never told her. But seeing the woman in person, here in her house, was something completely different. "Who's after you?" Marcus asked in a controlled voice, slowly approaching Isabel. His business instincts took over, displacing personal emotions. He was a man who could handle threats, who solved problems, no matter what kind. Isabel trembled all over. Whether from cold or fear was hard to say. Her coat dripped onto the marble floor, forming small puddles that reflected the light of the chandeliers. She opened her mouth to answer, but her voice failed at first. She cleared her throat, swallowed hard, and tried again. "The Bratva," she whispered, and the words seemed to cause her physical pain. "The Russian Mafia. They believe I have something that belongs to them. Something you allegedly gave me before we divorced." Marcus's face darkened instantly. The Bratva. This was no small thing, no empty threat. The Russian Mafia had extended its tentacles deeper and deeper into Chicago in recent years, had conquered territories that previously belonged to others. Marcus had so far been able to maintain a fragile peace with them, based on mutual respect and clearly defined boundaries. But if they believed he was withholding something from them, especially something valuable, then that peace was in danger. "What are they supposed to want from you?" Marcus asked sharply, and came even closer. "I didn't give you anything, nothing except the money from the divorce settlement." "I know," Isabel said desperately, and her eyes filled with tears. "But they don't believe me. They've searched my apartment twice. They've followed me, threatened me. 3 days ago." She broke off, swallowed hard, and pulled her coat tighter around herself. "They sent me a message, a very clear message." "What kind of message?" Eleanor suddenly asked and stepped closer. Her voice was icy, but Marcus could hear the curiosity in it. Eleanor wasn't a woman who backed away from dangers. On the contrary, she sometimes seemed to seek them out. Isabel cast a brief, uncertain glance at Elena, then looked back at Marcus. With trembling hands, she opened her coat and pulled out a folded photo from the inside pocket. She handed it to Marcus without saying a word. Marcus took the photo and unfolded it. What he saw made his blood freeze. It showed Isabel coming out of a supermarket, taken with a telephoto lens. But that wasn't the scary part. A cross had been drawn over the photo with red ink, and below it was a message in Russian. Marcus didn't know Russian, but he knew enough people who did, and he recognized a threat when he saw one. "What does it say?" Elena asked, trying to look over his shoulder. "They're giving me 3 more days," Isabel translated in a breaking voice. 3 days to give them what they want, or they'll find me and take it themselves. And then she couldn't continue. Marcus crumpled the photo in his fist. Anger boiled up in him, a hot, burning anger he rarely felt. Whoever these men were, they had crossed a line. They had threatened his ex-wife, a woman who had been under his protection, even if that marriage had ended long ago. In his world, that meant something. It meant they were challenging him. "Victor!" Marcus called out loudly, without taking his eyes off Isabel. "Double the security around the estate. No one comes in or out without my permission. And call Dimitri. Tell him I need to talk to him, immediately." Victor, who was still standing in the doorway, nodded and disappeared quickly. His steps echoed through the corridor as he hurried to execute the orders. Elena contemplated Marcus with an impenetrable expression. "So you're going to help her," she stated. It wasn't a question. Marcus turned to his wife. "What am I supposed to do, according to you, Elena? Leave her out here in the rain so the Bratva can find her?" "I'm not saying you should do that," Elena answered coolly. "I'm just noting that you went into action without hesitation. For her, I just wonder if you'd do the same for me." The unspoken accusation hung between them. Marcus opened his mouth to answer, but Isabel beat him to it. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, looking between the two of them. "I didn't want to invade your lives. I really had no one else to turn to. The police can't help me, not against the Bratva. And She stopped. Her voice became even quieter. "I thought maybe Marcus could find out what they really want, why they believe I have something." Marcus took a deep breath and tried to organize his thoughts. This was more complicated than he had initially thought. The Bratva didn't make empty threats, and if they were pursuing Isabel so persistently, then there was a reason, a very good reason. He needed to find out what it was before someone got seriously hurt. "You're staying here tonight," Marcus finally said with a firm voice. "We'll put you up in one of the guest rooms. Tomorrow morning I'll talk to my contacts and find out what the hell is going on here." "How generous of you," Elena remarked dryly. She put down her wineglass and crossed her arms over her chest. "May I ask where exactly you're going to put her up? Not in the West Wing, I hope. That is, after all, our private area." Marcus gave Elena a warning look. "Elena, not now." "When then, Marcus?" Elena erupted, and for the first time that evening the facade of control cracked. "When is the right time to talk about our marriage? When ex-wives aren't showing up? When Russian gangsters aren't threatening? When exactly is the right moment in your chaotic life?" The words hit harder than Marcus had expected. He saw the hurt in Elena's eyes, the frustration that had built up over months, maybe years. His second marriage hadn't been born of passion, he knew that. It had been a connection based on mutual benefit. Elena got security, status, and wealth, and he got an attractive, intelligent woman by his side who impressed his business partners. But at some point it had become more complicated. Elena had wanted more, demanded more, and Marcus hadn't been able to deliver. "Elena, I promise you we'll talk," Marcus said more quietly, more conciliatory. "But first I have to clear up this situation. Can you understand that?" Elena laughed bitterly. "Understand? Oh, I understand very well, Marcus. I understand that I always come second. I understand that your ex-wife just has to burst in and suddenly you're the caring protector you never were with me." Isabel stood uncomfortably, her hands crossed in front of her chest, as if she wanted to make herself as small as possible. "Maybe I should leave," she whispered. "This was a mistake. I shouldn't have come." "No," Marcus said determinedly and turned to her. "You're not going anywhere. Not tonight. It's too dangerous." He turned back to Elena. "And you, Elena, will control yourself a bit now. We're all adults here, and we'll handle this situation like adults." Elena stared at him for a long moment, her eyes blazing with suppressed anger. Then, without another word, she turned and stalked out of the room. The door slammed behind her, and the echo reverberated through the large house. Marcus stood there, his head in his hands, trying to regain control of the situation. Everything was slipping through his fingers. His marriage, his business, his carefully constructed world. Everything was beginning to crumble. "I'm really sorry," Isabel said quietly. She stepped closer, hesitantly, as if afraid he would send her away. "I didn't want to cause problems. I know you've moved on with your life. I didn't want to—" "Stop," Marcus interrupted her tiredly. He lowered his hands and looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since her arrival. The woman before him was no longer the lively, cheerful Isabel he had married. This woman was marked, frightened, broken. What had happened to her in this year? What had he done to her by simply cutting her out of his life? "Come," he finally said and pointed to the door. I'll take you to a guest room. You can warm up, put on dry clothes, and then you'll tell me everything. From the beginning, every detail." Isabel nodded gratefully. She followed him out of the living room, through the long, elegantly furnished corridors of the house. Marcus led her to the east wing, far from the rooms he shared with Elena. It was a spacious guest room, with a large canopy bed, its own bathroom, and a view of the garden, which was now barely visible in the darkness. "Here you should find everything you need," Marcus said, opening a closet. "Towels, bathrobes, also some clothing. They might be a bit large, but better than your wet things." "Thank you," Isabel whispered. She stood in the middle of the room, still trembling, her arms wrapped around herself. "Marcus, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me," Marcus said, and turned to the door. "Take a hot bath, change clothes. In an hour I'll come back and then we'll talk. And Isabel," he paused and turned to her once more, "lock the door. Don't trust anyone except me or Victor." "Understood," Isabel nodded, and in her eyes was something that made Marcus's heart heavy. Gratitude, yes, but also something else, something he couldn't or didn't want to name. When Marcus left the room and closed the door behind him, he heard the bolt being slid shut. Good, at least she was listening to him. He leaned against the wall for a moment, closed his eyes, and tried to organize his swirling thoughts. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw it was a message from Victor. "Dimitri's not answering. His men say he'll be unavailable for the next few days." Marcus cursed quietly. Dmitri Volkov was his main contact with the Bratva, the man with whom he conducted all business and arrangements. If Dmitri was suddenly unavailable, it meant either that something big was underway or that Dmitri himself was involved in the matter with Isabel. He wrote back, "Find him. Put all our people on it. I need him by tomorrow evening." Marcus put the phone back and headed to his study. He needed time to think, to plan. But as he walked down the corridor, a door suddenly opened to his left, and Elena stepped out. She had changed, and now wore a dark red silk robe that perfectly sculpted her body. Her hair was up, and her makeup was fresh. She looked stunning, but her eyes were cold as ice. "We need to talk," she said with a firm voice. "Now." Marcus sighed. "Elena, it's late, and I still have a lot to do." "Now, Marcus," Elena repeated with emphasis, "in our bedroom, and don't come with excuses." She turned and walked down the corridor without looking back to see if he was following. Marcus stood undecided for a moment, then followed her. Whatever Elena had to say, it was obviously important enough that she couldn't wait any longer. The master bedroom was in the west wing of the house, a huge room with high ceilings, French windows leading to the balcony, and a fireplace in which a fire burned. Elena went straight to the window and stared out into the rainy night. "Close the door," she said without turning around. Marcus did as he was told, and then leaned against the closed door, arms crossed over his chest. "So, what's so urgent that it can't wait until tomorrow?" Eleanor slowly turned around. Her face was a mask of control, but Marcus could see the emotions seething underneath. "I want her gone," Elena said without preamble. "Your ex-wife. I want her to leave this house first thing tomorrow morning." "I can't do that," Marcus answered calmly. "She's in danger, Elena. The Bratva doesn't interest me," Elena interrupted him passionately. Her voice got louder. Control began to crumble. "What interests me is that you care more about your ex-wife than your current wife. What interests me is that you took her in without hesitation, in our house, while you barely pay me any attention." "That's not true," Marcus protested, but the words sounded weak even to his own ears. "Yes, it is," Elena shouted now. Tears of frustration and anger ran down her cheeks. "I've been trying to talk to you for months, Marcus. For months I've been trying to get you to see me, really see me. But you were always too busy, always occupied with something else. And now she shows up, and suddenly you're the caring protector, the savior. Why, Marcus? Why can you be there for her, but not for me?" The question hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Marcus didn't know what to answer because he himself didn't know the answer. Or maybe he did know it, but didn't want to admit it, not even to himself. "Elena," he began, but she raised a hand to silence him. "I want the truth, Marcus," she said in a trembling voice. "No evasions, no lies. Do you still love her?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. Marcus stood there, unable to answer, unable to move. He looked at Elena, saw the vulnerability in her eyes, the fear of the answer, and in that moment he knew that whatever he said, it would be wrong. It would hurt someone, disappoint someone. He began, but the words wouldn't come. And then, in the tense silence, they both heard it. A loud bang that echoed through the house, the sound of splintering wood, and then screams. Marcus's training took over immediately. He tore open the door and ran down the corridor, Elena right behind him. His heart pounded in his chest as his mind already ran through the possibilities. Had they breached the estate? Had they come to take Isabel? He reached the guest room where he had housed Isabel and found the door broken down. Victor and 2 other guards stood in front of it, their weapons drawn, but no one was moving. "What happened?" Marcus gasped. Victor turned to him, his face pale. "Sir, you have to see this." Marcus pushed past him and entered the room. What he saw made his blood freeze. The room was empty. Isabel was gone. But on the bed lay an envelope, large and white, with Marcus's name written on it in elegant calligraphy. With trembling hands, Marcus took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a single note with a brief message in English. "We have what we wanted. The game has just begun. If you want to see her again, come alone to the address you know. Midnight, no police, no men, just you." Below was a signature, a stylized triangle, the symbol of the Bratva. Marcus stared at the note as his stomach tightened with fear. They had Isabel. In the middle of his house, under his nose, they had taken her. How was that possible? How had they managed to get past all his security measures? Elena stepped beside him and read the message over his shoulder. "Oh God," she whispered. Marcus turned to Victor. "How did this happen?" he asked in a dangerously calm voice. "How the hell could they get in here and kidnap her?" Victor shook his head, visibly shaken. "I don't know, sir. We were monitoring all entrances. All cameras were active. There are no recordings of anyone who entered or left the property." "That's impossible," Marcus said. But deep inside he knew it wasn't impossible. The Bratva was known for its efficiency, for its ability to make the impossible possible. And now they had Isabel, and he had only one choice. He had to go to them. The clock in the study ticked relentlessly, each second a hammer blow against Marcus's already tense nerves. It was 10:45 p.m., and he had an hour and 15 minutes until midnight. An hour and 15 minutes to make a decision that could mean life or death, not just for Isabel, but possibly for all of them. Marcus sat behind his massive mahogany desk, a map of Chicago with marked locations spread out before him. The address the Bratva had mentioned, the address you know, could only mean one place: the old warehouse at the port, where he had first met with Dmitry Volkov 3 years ago to redefine the boundaries of their territories. It was a neutral place, secluded enough to allow for discreet business, but also dangerous enough to serve as a trap. Victor stood next to the desk, arms crossed over his chest, his face a mask of concern and anger. Next to him stood 3 other men, Marcus's closest circle of trust. Tony, a burly man in his mid-40s with a scarred face and the experience of countless street fights. Raphael, slim and agile as a cat, a former military spy with connections to all kinds of intelligence services. And finally, James, the youngest of the group at 30 years old, but a technical genius who could hack any electronic system. "This is obviously a trap, boss," Tony said in his deep, rough voice. "They want you there, alone and vulnerable. If you go, you might not come back alive." "He's right," Raphael agreed, his dark eyes fixed on Marcus. "The Bratva is known for not keeping their promises. Even if you go, there's no guarantee they'll release Isabel. They could kill you both." Marcus heard their objections, understood the logic behind them, but another voice in his head was louder. It was the voice of the man he had once been, before business, money, and power had changed him. The voice of the man who had married Isabel, not because it was strategically smart, but because he, at least for a brief time, had believed there was something like love, even in his world. "I know it's a trap," Marcus said quietly. without taking his eyes off the map. But I have no other choice. If I don't go, they'll kill her, and I can't allow that. Why? A voice asked from the doorway. Elena stood there, still in her dark red silk robe, arms crossed over her chest. Her eyes were red from crying, but her posture was upright, defiant. Why can't you allow it, Marcus? She's your ex-wife. She doesn't mean anything to you anymore. That's what you've always said. Marcus slowly raised his head and looked at her. The men in the room fell silent, sensing the tension crackling between the couple. Victor cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we should leave you alone, he began, but Marcus interrupted him. No, stay here. We need to make a plan. He turned to Elena. And you should go upstairs, Elena. This doesn't concern you. Elena laughed bitterly, a laugh without any warmth. This doesn't concern me? My husband is about to risk his life for a woman who allegedly means nothing to him anymore. Of course it concerns me. She stepped further into the room, her bare feet making soft sounds on the polished wooden floor. The men instinctively backed away, giving her space. Elena had a presence that was hard to ignore, a mixture of beauty, intelligence, and a danger that lurked beneath the surface. Tell me the truth, Marcus, Elena demanded, now standing directly in front of his desk. Do you still love her? Is that why it's so important to you to save her? Marcus stared at her for a long moment, searching for the right words. How could he explain to her what he didn't fully understand himself? Yes, his marriage to Isabel had broken apart long ago. Yes, he had moved on, had married Elena, had tried to banish Isabel from his thoughts. But there was something there, an echo of old feelings, a guilt that had never completely disappeared. Isabel had been innocent when he married her. She hadn't known his world, not really, and he had thrown her into it, had allowed that world to change her, break her. Wasn't that reason enough to save her now? I owe her something, Marcus finally said, his voice quiet but firm. Not love, Elena, but I owe her reparation. I destroyed her life when I dragged her into my world. The least I can do is make sure she gets out of this alive. Elena stared at him, and for a moment Marcus saw something flicker in her eyes, understanding perhaps, or at least acceptance. But then her features hardened again. And what about me? She asked quietly. What do you owe me, Marcus? The question hit him harder than he expected. What did he owe Elena? She had married him with full knowledge of who he was, what he did. She had enjoyed the advantages, the money, the status, the power. But didn't she also deserve more? Didn't she deserve to be loved, not just as a possession, but as a person? Before Marcus could answer, James spoke up. Boss, we have a problem. He held up his tablet, on which a series of video recordings could be seen. I've been reviewing the security footage from the last 2 hours. Look at this. Marcus stood up and walked around the desk. On the screen was footage from the east wing of the house, right in front of the guest room where he had housed Isabel. The timestamp showed 11:32, about 20 minutes after Marcus had left Isabel there. The recording showed the empty corridor, nothing unusual. Then, suddenly, the image flickered for less than a second. When it became clear again, there was a figure standing in front of the door, tall, dressed all in black, face hidden behind a mask. The figure pulled something from their pocket, an electronic device that they held to the door lock. Within seconds, the door sprang open. How did he get past the guards? Marcus asked sharply. James tapped on the tablet and showed another camera. Here, the guards were at that time at the other end of the corridor, almost as if they had deliberately looked away. A mole, Victor muttered through clenched teeth. Someone on our own team let them in. The implication was shocking. Marcus trusted his people, had personally selected and vetted each of them. The idea that one of them had betrayed him was hard to accept. Who was on duty at that time? Marcus asked icily. James scrolled through his notes. Patterson and Rodriguez. Both have been with us for 5 years. Bring them here, Marcus ordered. Immediately. I want to talk to both of them before I go to this meeting. Victor nodded and pulled out his phone to relay the instructions. Meanwhile, Marcus continued watching the video recordings. The masked figure had been visible on the cameras for a total of 38 seconds. Then it had disappeared with Isabel, simply gone, as if it had dissolved into thin air. How did they get out? Marcus asked aloud. We monitor every exit, every entrance. How could they just disappear? Maybe they didn't get out, Raphael said slowly, formulating a dangerous theory. Maybe they're still here, somewhere in the house. The words made everyone in the room freeze. Marcus's house was large, 64 rooms on 3 floors, plus basement and attic. There were countless hiding places, places where someone could hide, especially if they knew where the cameras were. Search the entire estate, Marcus immediately ordered. Every room, every closet, every corner. If they're still here, I want to find them. And if they're not here, I want to know how the hell they escaped. The men immediately got to work, drew their weapons and dispersed to systematically search the house. Victor coordinated via radio with the other guards outside. Only Eleanor remained standing, watching Marcus with an impenetrable expression. "You're going anyway, aren't you?" she stated. "No matter what they find or don't find here." Marcus slowly nodded. "I have no choice, Elena." "Everyone has a choice," Elena contradicted quietly. She stepped closer until she stood directly in front of him, so close he could smell her perfume, something floral, expensive. "You could call the police. You could send your men, a whole team. You could—" "The Bratva will kill her if I don't come alone," Marcus interrupted her. "You know that. We all know that. The only chance Isabel has is if I meet their demands." Elena looked him directly in the eyes, and what she saw there seemed to shake her. "You would really die for her," she whispered, "for a woman you allegedly don't love anymore." "It's not about love," Marcus said, but even to him the words sounded hollow. "It's about responsibility, about guilt." "Responsibility," Elena repeated bitterly. She took a step back and wrapped her robe tighter around herself, as if suddenly cold. "And what about your responsibility to me, Marcus? What about our marriage?" Marcus opened his mouth to answer, but at that moment Victor burst back into the study. His face was flushed, his breath rapid. "Boss, we found something," he gasped. "In the basement. You have to come, immediately." Marcus cast Elena one last look, then followed Victor out of the room. They hurried through the corridors, down the stairs, past the kitchen, and through an inconspicuous door leading to the basement rooms. The basement of Marcus's estate had been renovated, partly as a wine cellar, partly as a storage room, and a separated area served as an improvised interrogation room for difficult situations. Victor led him to a room in the back corner that Marcus rarely visited. The door was open, and inside stood Tony and Raphael, both with drawn weapons, leaning over something or someone. When Marcus entered, he immediately saw what they had found. On the cold concrete floor, bound and gagged, lay Patterson, one of the guards who had been on duty when Isabel was kidnapped. His face was blood-stained, one eye was swollen, and he looked like he had been in a fight. "What the hell happened here?" Marcus asked sharply. Tony turned to him. "We found him here, boss. Unconscious, tied up. Looks like someone took him out." Marcus knelt beside Patterson and carefully removed the gag. The man coughed, spit blood, and tried to catch his breath. "Patterson, who did this to you?" Marcus asked in a firm voice. Patterson opened his good eye and looked directly at Marcus. "Rodriguez, boss," he croaked. "Rodriguez hit me from behind. I didn't see anything coming." Marcus's jaw tightened. Rodriguez, a man who had worked for him for 5 years, whom he had trusted, who had access to everything, to the security codes, to the surveillance systems, to the guard rotations. "Where is Rodriguez now?" Marcus asked. "Gone," Victor answered. "We've searched everywhere. He's not in the house, not on the grounds. It's as if he vanished into thin air." "He went with them," Marcus said slowly as the pieces fell into place. "The Bratva bought him. He helped them get in here, got Isabel out, and then disappeared with them." "How much did they pay him?" Raphael muttered darkly. "That doesn't matter," Marcus said and stood up. His voice was cold as ice. "What matters is that we now know they had someone in our innermost circle, which means they know everything, our strengths, our weaknesses, our routines. This meeting tonight is definitely a trap." "All the more reason not to go," Victor urged. But Marcus shook his head. "No. That's precisely why I have to go. If I don't show up, if I show that I'm afraid, then they've won. Then they know they can control me. And that can never happen." He turned to his men, his face a mask of determination. "Here's what we'll do. Victor, You coordinate a team that positions itself around the warehouse, not too close, but close enough to intervene if necessary. Raphael, you monitor everything with night vision goggles and thermal sensors from a nearby building. Tony, you stay here and protect the house. And Elena. James, I need a live feed. I want you to be able to see everything that happens. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, a tiny camera, barely larger than a button. James developed this last week. I'll attach it to my jacket. You'll be able to see and hear everything. Boss, if the Bratva searches you, Victor began worriedly. Then they'll find it, Marcus finished. But maybe they underestimate me. Maybe they assume I really come alone, unarmed and without backup. That's their mistake. He looked at his watch. 11:18. Still 42 minutes until midnight. Enough time to prepare, but not enough to allow doubts. Everyone to your positions, Marcus ordered. We'll meet at the vehicles in 10 minutes. The men nodded and got to work, dispersing to carry out their assigned tasks. Marcus remained in the basement for a moment, staring at Patterson, who still lay bound on the floor. Make sure he gets medical attention, Marcus said to no one in particular, and then bring him to one of the guest rooms. He's proven his loyalty. We won't forget that. Then Marcus went back upstairs, his thoughts already circling around the impending confrontation. As he climbed the stairs, he saw Elena standing at the top, still in her robe, arms crossed. "You're really going," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Marcus answered simply. Elena slowly nodded, and for a moment Marcus saw something in her eyes he didn't expect. Concern. Genuine, sincere concern for his well-being. "Then come back alive," she said quietly. "And when you come back, Marcus, we need to seriously talk about us, about our marriage, about everything." "We will," Marcus promised. He stepped closer and took her hand, a rare moment of intimacy between them. "Elena, I know I haven't been a good husband. I know you deserved more, but if I come back tonight, I promise you that something will change." Eleanor looked into his eyes, searching for sincerity, a sign that he really meant it. Whatever she saw there seemed to calm her. She nodded slightly and squeezed his hand. "Then go," she said. "Do what you have to do, but come back to me." Marcus nodded, released her hand, and went to his bedroom to change. He put on a black turtleneck and dark pants, along with his trusted leather jacket. No weapon. The Bratva would surely search him, but he hid a small knife in his boot just in case. When he was ready, he attached the tiny camera to his jacket, barely visible in the dim light. Then he looked at himself one last time in the mirror. The man looking back at him had aged in recent years, hardened. But in his eyes was still the spark of something he thought he had long lost: humanity. It was time. Marcus left the bedroom and went down to the garage. Victor was already waiting there with the black SUV, the engine running. Raphael and Tony sat in a second vehicle, ready to follow at a safe distance. "Everything ready?" Marcus asked as he got in. "Everything ready, boss," Victor confirmed and drove off. The drive to the port took 25 minutes through Chicago's nighttime streets. The rain had stopped, but the air was still damp and cold. The city was mostly asleep, only scattered lights shone in the windows of the skyscrapers. When they approached the old warehouse, Marcus had Victor stop at some distance. "From here I go on foot," he said. "Boss?" Victor began to protest. "No discussion," Marcus cut him off. "Keep your distance, but be ready. If I give the signal, you come in. But not before." Victor reluctantly nodded. Marcus got out and began walking toward the warehouse. It was a massive, dilapidated red brick building, surrounded by rusty barbed wire and broken windows. The perfect place for a secret meeting or an ambush. As Marcus approached, he saw a figure standing in front of the main entrance. A tall man in a black coat, hands in pockets. When Marcus came closer, he recognized him. Ivan, one of Dmitri's right-hand men. "Marcus Donnelly," Ivan said with a strong Russian accent. "Punctual as always. Please follow me." Marcus nodded and followed Ivan inside the warehouse. The smell of mold and rotting wood hit him. The interior was sparsely lit. Only a few naked bulbs cast weak light on the dusty concrete floors and empty shelves. They walked through a long corridor, then through a heavy metal door into a larger room. And there, in the center of the room, Marcus saw her, Isabel. She sat on a chair, hands tied behind her back, but otherwise apparently unharmed. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, but when she saw Marcus, something flickered in them. Hope. Around her stood at least 10 men, all armed, all with the same expressionless face, and in the background, leaning casually against a pillar, stood Dmitry Volkov himself. Dmitry was in his early 50s, a man with grey hair, carefully combed back and piercing blue eyes. He wore an expensive suit and smoked a cigar, as if this were a social meeting and not a blackmail attempt. "Marcus," Dmitry said with a broad smile that didn't reach his eyes, "how nice to see you again. Come closer. We have much to discuss." Marcus stepped forward, his eyes always on Dmitry, but his peripheral vision registered every man, every weapon, every possible escape route. This was definitely a trap, but he was here, and now he had to make the best of it. "Let her go, Dmitry," Marcus said without preamble. "She has nothing that belongs to you. Whatever you think I gave her, you're wrong." Dmitry laughed, a deep, rumbling laugh. "Oh, Marcus, always so direct. That's something I admire about you. No games, no lies, or—" He stepped closer, his eyes narrowed. "Maybe there are?" He snapped his fingers, and one of his men stepped forward, holding a brown envelope in his hand. Dmitry took it and handed it to Marcus. "Open it," Dmitry ordered. Marcus took the envelope and carefully opened it. Inside were photos, dozens of photos. Photos of him and Isabel, taken during their marriage. Photos of meetings, of conversations, of transactions. Marcus's blood froze when he recognized what he was seeing. These weren't ordinary memory photos. These were surveillance photos, taken by someone who had been watching them the whole time. And in one of the photos, Marcus saw something that took his breath away. Himself handing Isabel a small key. He remembered that moment. It had been 2 months before their divorce, on one of their last good days. Isabel had had a birthday, and he had given her a gift, a safe deposit box in a bank, filled with enough money to allow her a fresh start, in case she ever needed to get away from him. An act of remorse, of reparation, but he had completely forgotten that in that safe deposit box there wasn't just money. There was also something else, something he had hidden there at the time, because it seemed the safest place. A USB drive with compromising information about all his business partners, including the Bratva, insurance against betrayal. And if the Bratva knew that— "You're beginning to understand," Dmitry said with a smug smile. "Yes, Marcus. We know about the safe deposit box. We know you gave your dear ex-wife the key, and we want what's inside." Marcus stared at Dmitry, his mind working feverishly. "Isabel knows nothing about this," he said firmly. "She never used the key. She never checked what's in the safe deposit box." "That may be," Dmitry said with a shrug, "but she has the key, and that makes her valuable, just as valuable as you." He stepped closer to Marcus. His voice became lower, more dangerous. "So, Marcus, here's my offer. You give me what I want, the contents of that safe deposit box, and I'll release your ex-wife. Refuse and—" He pulled a gun from his jacket and casually aimed it at Isabel. "Well, I think you understand the consequences." Marcus's hands clenched into fists. He was trapped. If he gave the Bratva the USB drive, they would have all the information they needed to destroy him, not just him, but dozens of others. But if he refused, Isabel would die. "What about Elena?" Marcus suddenly asked, a crazy idea forming in his head. "My current wife. What if I gave you her instead?" Dmitry raised an eyebrow in surprise, then laughed again. "Interesting. You'd sacrifice your current wife to save your ex? Marcus, you always surprise me." But Marcus wasn't serious. He was playing for time, trying to find a way out of this situation. And then, as if it were an answer to an unspoken prayer, he heard a voice behind him. "That won't be necessary." Everyone turned. There, at the entrance to the room, stood Elena. She now wore jeans and a leather jacket. Her hair was tied in a ponytail, and in her hand she held a gun, aimed directly at Dmitry. "Elena!" Marcus gasped in disbelief. "What the hell?" "Surprised?" Elena asked with a cold smile. She stepped further into the room, the weapon steady in her hand, her gaze fixed on Dmitry. "Did you really think I'd stay home and wait patiently? Oh, Marcus, you obviously don't know me at all. Die, seized with the tension in the room, was palpable, electric, as if the air itself vibrated with anticipation. Elena stood there, the weapon steady in her hand, her face a mask of determination. The Bratva men reacted immediately, drew their own weapons and aimed them at Elena, but Dmitri raised a hand to stop them. "Fascinating," Dmitri said slowly, his blue eyes examining Elena with new interest. "Mrs. Donnelly, what an unexpected turn. Tell me, how did you get in here? My men should have stopped you." Elena smiled coldly. "Your men are occupied. Some of them are sleeping very soundly right now. The others, well, let's just say they're distracted." She paused, her gaze briefly sliding to Marcus, then back to Dmitri. "You made a mistake, Dmitri. You assumed I was just a pretty trophy wife. That was foolish of you." Marcus stared at Elena, as if seeing her for the first time. Who was this woman? The calm, elegant Elena he thought he knew had suddenly become someone completely different, someone dangerous, competent, someone who clearly knew more than he had ever suspected. "Elena, what are you doing here?" Marcus asked in a firm voice, though his mind desperately tried to grasp the situation. "What I should have done before it came to this point," Elena answered without taking her eyes off Dmitri. "Taking my life into my own hands. Instead of waiting for you to rescue me or protect me or even notice me." Dmitri laughed, but it sounded forced. "Brave, Mrs. Donnelly, very brave, but foolish. You're one woman alone, surrounded by 10 of my best men. Do you really believe you'll get out of here alive?" "I'm not alone," Elena said calmly, and as if she had said it on cue, several smoke grenades suddenly exploded in the room. Dense, white smoke filled the air, making it almost impossible to see. Screams rang out, orders were shouted in Russian, men stumbled into each other. Marcus reacted instinctively. He threw himself to the ground, crawled toward Isabel. His hands found the restraints, pulled at them. They were fastened with zip ties, too strong to break with bare hands. He reached for the knife in his boot, pulled it out, and began sawing through the plastic restraints. "Marcus," Isabel gasped, her voice trembling with fear and relief. I thought you wouldn't come." "Quiet," Marcus hissed, continuing to work on the restraints. "We don't have time. As soon as you're free, you run, understood? You run to the exit and don't hide." The restraints gave way, and Isabel rubbed her aching wrists. Through the smoke, Marcus could see figures moving, heard the sound of blows, of suppressed cries of pain. Someone was fighting out there in the smoke, and he had a strong suspicion it was Elena. Suddenly the smoke parted for a moment, and Marcus saw something that shook him. Elena stood amid 3 Bratva men, moving with a speed and precision that clearly indicated professional training. She disarmed a man with a quick hand chop, kicked another in the knee, and made him fall to the ground and blocked the blow of the third with her forearm before ramming her elbow into his face. "What the hell?" Marcus muttered in disbelief, but he had no time to think about it. He grabbed Isabel by the arm and dragged her toward the door through which he had entered. But before they could even take 3 steps, Ivan emerged from the smoke, a gigantic figure blocking their way. In his hand, he held a black pistol aimed directly at Marcus's chest. "Stop!" Ivan growled in broken English, "or I shoot!" Marcus pushed Isabel behind him and slowly raised his hands. His mind worked feverishly, searching for an exit, a distraction, anything. And then, right at that moment, he heard a familiar sound, the sound of shattering glass, followed by the sharp crack of gunshots. Victor and his team had arrived. The distraction was all Marcus needed. He threw himself to the side, pulling Isabel with him to the ground. Just as Ivan fired, the bullet whistled over their heads and embedded itself in the wall behind them. Before Ivan could aim again, a figure came rushing out of the smoke, Tony, who threw himself with all his weight at the Russian giant and brought him down. "Boss, get out of here!" Tony shouted as he wrestled with Ivan. "We've got this!" Marcus nodded, pulled Isabel to her feet and ran with her to the door. Behind them they heard the chaos escalating, gunshots, screams, the sound of fighting, but Marcus focused only on getting Isabel to safety. They rushed through the corridor, past 2 unconscious guards, presumably Elena's work, and finally reached the main entrance. The cold night air hit them, and Marcus took a deep breath, grateful to have escaped the stuffy, smoke-filled warehouse. To the SUV, Marcus gasped and pointed to the black vehicle standing about 50 meters away. Victor left the key in the ignition. Get in and drive. No matter what happens, you drive. What? Isabel asked, horrified. Marcus, no, I can't leave you. Don't argue, Marcus snapped. Go now! Isabel hesitated for one more moment, then nodded and ran to the SUV. Marcus watched her until he was sure she had reached the vehicle, then turned and ran back into the warehouse. He couldn't simply leave Elena and his men, not now. When he burst back into the large room, the smoke had largely dissipated. The scene that presented itself to him was chaotic. At least 5 of Dimitri's men lay unconscious or groaning on the ground. Victor, Raphael and Tony fought against the remaining ones, and the gunshots had ceased. Presumably, no one wanted to risk hitting their own people. And in the center of the room stood Elena and Dimitri facing each other, both armed, both in a stalemate. Dimitri's suit was torn, his face blood-stained, but his weapon was steadily aimed at Elena. Elena's hair had come loose from the ponytail. Her jacket was torn, but her eyes gleamed with an intensity Marcus had never seen in her. Give up, Dimitri, Elena said in a firm voice. It's over. Your men are defeated. Marcus's backup is here. You've lost. Dimitri laughed, a bitter, joyless sound. Lost? Oh, Mrs. Donnelly, you don't understand. I've already won, because even if I die tonight, my organization will continue. And they won't stop until they get what they want. Then tell me what you really want, Elena demanded. It's not just about the USB drive, is it? That's too simple. There's something else. Dimitri's smile slowly faded. You're clever, he admitted. Cleverer than your husband gives you credit for. Yes, there's something else. On that USB drive, there isn't just information about business deals. There are names of people in very high positions who work with us, judges, politicians, police officers. If those names became public, he paused. Let's just say it would be very bad for many powerful people. Marcus, who had been following the conversation from the doorway, suddenly understood the full scope. It wasn't about money or territory. It was about control, about power. The USB drive had been insurance he had created years ago, but now it was a ticking time bomb that could threaten not only the Bratva, but the entire corrupt system lurking beneath Chicago's surface. The USB drive no longer exists, Marcus suddenly said loudly and stepped into the room. All eyes turned to him. I destroyed it 6 months ago, burned it. The information is gone. Dimitri turned to him, the pistol swung in his direction. You're lying, he hissed. No, Marcus said calmly. I'm not lying. I realized that information was too dangerous to keep, so I destroyed it. The safe deposit box is empty, Dimitri. Isabel has nothing you want. She never did. The silence that followed was overwhelming. Dimitri stared at Marcus, his eyes searching for a sign of deception, a hint that this was just a bluff. But Marcus's face was impenetrable, his voice firm. And slowly, very slowly, Dimitri began to understand that it might be the truth. You fool, Dimitri finally whispered. You damned fool. Do you know what you've done? That information was your only insurance. Without it, you're vulnerable. We're all vulnerable. Maybe, Marcus admitted, but I'm tired of living my life in fear. I'm tired of every decision I make being dictated by the fear that someone might reveal my secrets. So I eliminated them. And you know what, Dimitri? It feels damn good. Dimitri slowly lowered his weapon, a strange mixture of respect and disbelief on his face. You're either the bravest or the stupidest man I've ever met, Marcus Donnelly. Maybe both, Marcus said with a weak smile. Elena also lowered her weapon, walked up to Marcus, and looked him directly in the eyes. Did you really destroy the USB drive? She asked quietly. Marcus nodded. 6 months ago, shortly after we got married, I wanted to start fresh, without the weight of the past. He paused. I never told you about it because I didn't want you to think I was weak. Elena stared at him for a long moment, then, surprisingly, laughed. It was an honest, uninhibited laugh, the first Marcus had heard from her in months. Weak? Marcus, that's the bravest thing you've ever done. You threw away your biggest weapon to be free. That's not weakness. That's strength. Dimitri interrupted the moment. This is all very touching, the Russian gangster said dryly. But I still have a decision to make. I could have you all killed now. It would be easy. His hand moved toward his weapon, and everyone in the room immediately tensed. But, he paused. His blue eyes wandered between Marcus and Elena. I respect courage, and you two have shown more courage tonight than I've seen in a long time, so I'm going to make you an offer. What kind of offer? Marcus asked cautiously. You disappear, Dmitri said simply. You leave Chicago, leave Illinois, ideally leave the entire East Coast. You start over somewhere, far from here, and in return, he shrugged, in return I'll tell my superiors that Marcus Donnelly is dead, killed in a confrontation. His body was never found. That should satisfy them. Elena and Marcus exchanged a quick glance. It was a way out, a chance for what Marcus had just described, a new life, free from the past. But it also meant leaving behind everything they knew, friends, family, connections. What about my people? Marcus asked, pointing to Victor, Raphael, and Tony, who were still watchfully monitoring the situation. They've served me for years. I can't just leave them behind. Pay them generously, Dmitri suggested. Give them enough money to live comfortably and advise them to find new employers. They're good men. They'll find their way. Marcus slowly nodded. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than the alternative. An endless war with the Bratva, constant danger, possibly death. He turned to Elena. What do you think? He asked quietly. Elena smiled, and for the first time in months, Marcus saw genuine warmth in her smile. I think it's time for a fresh start. For both of us. Marcus nodded, then turned back to Dmitri. We accept your offer, but under one condition. Dmitri raised an eyebrow. And what would that be? Isabel is also free, Marcus said firmly. No persecution, no threats, nothing. She was innocent in all of this. She deserves to live in peace. Dmitri considered for a moment, then nodded. Agreed. The ex-wife is free, but she should also consider leaving the city, just to be safe. I'll tell her, Marcus promised. Dmitri put away his weapon and extended his hand. Then we have an agreement, Mr. Donnelly. Or should I say the late Mr. Donnelly? Marcus shook his hand, a strangely formal closure to such a chaotic night. An agreement. Dmitri nodded to his remaining men, who began collecting their wounded comrades. Within minutes, the room had emptied, and only Marcus, Elena, and Marcus's team remained. Victor stepped forward, his face showing a mixture of concern and confusion. Boss, what just happened? What did you promise him? Marcus placed a hand on Victor's shoulder. I'm retiring, Victor. Elena and I are disappearing, starting over somewhere else, and I want you and the others to do the same. I'll give each of you $200,000. Enough to start over, begin a new career, whatever you want. Victor stared at him in disbelief. Boss, you can't just... I can, and I will. Marcus interrupted him gently. Victor, you've served me for 15 years. You've risked your life for me, more times than I can count. Now it's time for you to think about yourself. Find something better, something safer. You've earned it. Victor seemed to search for words, but found none. Finally, he simply nodded, his eyes glistening suspiciously. It's been an honor to work for you, boss. The honor was all mine, Marcus said honestly. Similar farewell scenes played out with Raphael, Tony, and James. Each of them expressed their surprise, but also their understanding. They were professionals. They knew that everything had to have an end someday. When finally all the farewell words had been said and Marcus's men had left, only Elena and Marcus stood in the now empty warehouse. The first dawn began to appear on the horizon, casting weak grey light through the broken windows. What now? Elena asked quietly. Marcus looked at her, this remarkable woman he had underestimated all these years. Now we go home, pack our things, and then... He smiled. Then we choose a place. Somewhere warm, I think. Somewhere far from Chicago and all its memories. California, Elena suggested. I've always been curious about San Diego. San Diego sounds good, Marcus agreed. Sun, beach, a fresh start. They walked out of the warehouse together into the cold dawn. The SUV still stood where they had left it, but Isabel was gone, presumably already on her way to her own new future. Marcus felt a weight fall from his shoulders, a weight he had carried so long that he had forgotten what freedom felt like. There were still questions. still uncertainties about the future, but for the first time in years, he felt real hope. Elena slid into the driver's seat. "I'm driving," she said with a mischievous smile. "You look like you could use a break." Marcus laughed, a genuine, liberated laugh. "I definitely could." They drove through the awakening city, past the familiar streets and buildings that would soon be only memories. Marcus leaned his head against the window and contemplated Chicago one last time. This city had made him, had shaped him into the man he had become, for better or worse. But now it was time to let go, time to see who Marcus Donnelly could be when he was no longer the Mafia boss, no longer the feared businessman, no longer the man living in fear and power. Time to simply be Marcus. When they reached the estate, they saw that the sun had fully risen, bathing everything in golden light. Elena parked the car, and together they entered the house. "How long do you think it will take to pack everything?" Elena asked. "Not long," Marcus answered. "Most of the things here mean nothing to me. Clothes, a few personal items, important documents. The rest can stay." They went up the stairs to their bedroom. Elena began pulling suitcases out of the closet, while Marcus sat on the bed and pulled out his phone. He had some calls to make. His banks, his lawyers, people who would help him transfer his fortune and erase his traces. While he made calls, he watched Elena as she methodically packed her things. She moved with an efficiency that indicated years of experience. Who was this woman, really? What exactly was her interesting previous life? There was so much he still didn't know about her. But now he would have time to find out. They would have time to really get to know each other, without the distractions and dangers of their previous life. "Eleanor," Marcus said after finishing his last call, "I have to tell you something." She looked up from her suitcase. "What?" Marcus stood up and walked over to her, took her hands in his. "I'm sorry for everything, for neglecting you, for never really seeing you, for treating you like an object instead of a partner. You deserved so much more, and I was too blind to see it." Elena looked into his eyes, and he saw tears glistening in them. "Marcus, I'm not innocent either. I've kept things from you, hidden parts of my past. I thought if you knew who I really was, what I'd done before we met, you wouldn't want me. Tell me now," Marcus asked. "Who are you really, Elena?" Elena sat on the bed, and Marcus sat next to her. She took a deep breath, as if preparing for a difficult confession. "Before I met you," she began quietly, "I was an agent, not for the CIA or FBI, but for a more private, more discreet organization. We worked for governments and corporations, carried out tasks too delicate for official channels. I was good at my job, very good. But it was also lonely, dangerous. And at some point I realized I couldn't do that for the rest of my life." Marcus listened, fascinated. Suddenly, so many things made sense. Her fighting skills, her cold blood in dangerous situations, the way she had overpowered the Bratva men tonight. "When I met you," Elena continued, "I saw a chance for a different life, a normal life, or at least as normal as possible in your world. So I left my organization, invented a new identity, and, well, you know the rest. We met, fell in love, or at least I thought we would, and got married." "Were you ever really in love with me?" Marcus asked, and his voice trembled slightly. It was a question he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer to. Eleanor turned to him. Her green eyes met his. "In the beginning, honestly, no. You were a means to an end, a way out of my old life. But over time," she smiled weakly, "over time, it became real. I started to really like you, to admire your strength, to appreciate your rare moments of vulnerability. And then I started to love you, really love you. But by that point you were so closed off, so focused on your business that I didn't know how to reach you." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "I love you too," he said. And as he spoke the words, he recognized they were true. At some point during their marriage, without him really realizing it, Elena had become someone important to him. Someone without whom he couldn't imagine his life. "I know I never said it. I know I never showed it. But I love you, Elena. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Elena smiled through her tears. "That's all I ever wanted." They kissed, a long, deep kiss that said more than words ever could. When they pulled apart, Marcus felt a lightness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. "Let's finish packing," Elena finally said. "The sooner we get out of here, the better." They worked together, packing their most important possessions into 4 large suitcases. Marcus went to his study and opened the safe, took out cash, important documents, and a few sentimental items, a photo of his parents, an old pocket knife of his father's, a few other mementos from simpler times. As he stood there, his gaze fell on a framed photo on the desk. It showed him and Isabel on their wedding day, both smiling, innocent, unaware of how their story would end. He took the photo and contemplated it for a long moment. "Goodbye, Isabel," he murmured quietly. "I hope you find your happiness." Then he put the photo back on the desk and left the room without looking back. When they were finally ready to leave, they stood in the entrance hall and looked around one last time. The house that had once been a symbol of Marcus's power and success now felt empty, like a shell without a soul. "Do you regret it?" Elena asked quietly. Marcus shook his head, not for a second. They loaded the suitcases into Elena's car, an inconspicuous blue sedan that wouldn't attract the attention that Marcus's usual vehicles did. When they got in and Elena started the engine, Marcus received one last text message. It was from Victor. "Everything's settled, boss. The money has been transferred. We're all grateful. Take care of yourself." Marcus smiled and wrote back, "You too. Live well." Then he turned off his phone and threw it out the window, watched as it hit the ground and broke into pieces. Another step toward cutting his old connections, another step toward freedom. Elena drove off, and they left the estate behind. As they drove through the city, passing the familiar streets one last time, Marcus thought about everything that had happened. In just one night, his entire life had changed. He had lost friends, cut connections, given up an empire. But he had also gained something, the chance for real love, real freedom, a life without fear. "You know what's strange?" Marcus said as they got on the highway that would take them out of Chicago. "What?" Elena asked. "I thought I'd be sadder. All these years I've spent my life building what I had, and now I'm giving up everything and I feel relieved, free." Elena smiled. "That's because what you built was keeping you captive. It was a golden cage, but still a cage. Now you're free, Marcus. We're both free." They drove for hours, stopping only briefly to refuel and eat. When the sun set and they crossed the Illinois border, Marcus felt finally disconnected from his past. "Where should we go first?" Elena asked. "Straight to California." Marcus thought for a moment. "I think we should take our time. Maybe drive through the country, see different places before we settle somewhere. What do you think?" "Sounds perfect," Elena said. "A real road trip. Just the two of us." They stopped at a small motel on the highway, somewhere in Indiana. It was modest, a huge contrast to the opulence Marcus was used to, but it felt honest, real. That night, as they lay in bed, the cheap curtains moving in the wind from an open air conditioner, Marcus held Elena in his arms. For the first time in forever, he felt completely at peace. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Elena asked sleepily. "For giving me a second chance. For believing in me, even when I didn't. For being you." Elena turned and kissed him gently. "Thank you too, for being brave enough to let everything go, for giving us a real chance." They fell asleep, tightly embraced, two people who had found a second chance at the life they really wanted. 2 weeks later, in a small bank in San Diego, a man calling himself John Miller opened a new account. Next to him stood his wife, who introduced herself as Sarah Miller. They smiled, signed the papers, and left the bank holding hands. No one would have recognized in the couple strolling down the sunny street Marcus and Elena Donnelly. They had dyed their hair, Marcus wore glasses, Elena moved with a new, more relaxed posture. They were no longer the Mafia boss and his trophy wife. They were simply John and Sarah, a couple starting over in San Diego, without the burden of the past. They rented a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, just a few blocks from the beach. Marcus found work as a consultant for a small company, nothing glamorous, but honest. Elena opened a small self-defense school for women, using her skills in a way that gave her a sense of purpose and fulfillment. And on a warm evening in July, as they sat on their porch with a glass of wine in their hands, the sun setting over the ocean, Elena turned to Marcus. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Giving up everything?" Marcus thought for a moment, then shook his head. "Not for a second. He pointed to their modest house, the peaceful street, both of them. "This is worth more than everything I ever had." Elena smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Marcus." "I love you too, Elena," he answered, and kissed her forehead. And in that moment, as the sun set and the world was bathed in golden light, Marcus Donnelly, or John Miller, as he now called himself, knew he had finally found home. Not a house of brick and marble, but a home that resided in the arms of the woman he loved, in a life free from fear and full of possibilities. The story of the Mafia boss didn't end with violence or betrayal, but with something much rarer and more precious: redemption and a second chance. And 3 months later, when Elena told Marcus with shining eyes that she was pregnant, he knew their new life was just beginning. A family, a fresh start, a chance to do it right this time. The past was buried, the future was bright, and for the first time in his life, Marcus Donnelly was truly free.